My name is Matt Weld, and this is the Teacher's Classroom. We strive to take the big issues in education and figure out how they relate to teaching and to students. I'm glad you're here. Here at Teach Illinois, one of our most popular courses for professional development is the book study. As the moderator of these conversations revolving around all sorts of topics, I end up reading a lot of books on education, which is cool in that I'm exposed to a lot of great ideas and techniques that I frankly wish I'd known when I was a classroom teacher. It can be frustrating, however, when I dive into a topic and come out the other side just needing something more. For example, I'm working on preparing a book study over John Hattie's Visible Learning for Teachers, which is pretty dense writing. There's just so much there. After reading the part about feedback, I started reflecting on my teaching and the teaching of all the teachers with whom I'd worked over the years, and I came up with a couple reflective points. First of all, that about 95% of the feedback I'd given over the years wasn't really feedback. It was advice. Or at least it was me spending time on something that didn't actually result in learning. It was just me giving up my evenings and weekends. The second thing is that it took way more time than necessary. And lastly, probably most importantly, is that I needed to find someone who could give me more concrete solutions on how teachers can provide good feedback and also what exactly good feedback looks like. And so that's when I found Amy Mayer.
My name's Amy Mayer, and I hail from Texas, and I run a Google professional development partner company called Fried Technology. And what we do is help schools and school districts, school systems to implement technology effectively.
So Amy and I met in an itty-bitty town called Flora in central Illinois. We were both there for a Google EDU event. She was flown in from Texas as the Google guru, and I was there as a tech guy from Illinois, eager to participate in an official Google EDU event. After her presentation, our conversation turned to the topic of feedback and how that is one of the main topics that she's called to districts for.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'm really passionate about this topic. And one of the things that got me so passionate about it is that in the beginning of my career, I was a high school English teacher, and I felt like I was spending all my time, not just my time at work, but my time outside work, trying to provide this feedback that I felt compelled to provide. But it wasn't until years into the process, I started asking myself some questions like, what good is this work doing? And how do I make sure that what I'm providing is actually making any kind of a difference to a student's education, instead of just me trying to check some kind of an accountability box that I have, given to myself. So when I became reflective about it, it really changed my career, my time management. And so, I'm very passionate about talking about it. And I find that teachers are very, very interested in also having those conversations.
Well, because I know a lot of teachers, they hear that term work smarter, not harder. Mm-hmm. And I think true feedback and effective feedback kind of ties into that. Would you agree with that? Or
Yes, I 100% agree with that, because it's one of the most time-consuming things that you do as a teacher besides supervision. So if you can look at the ways that you're spending the majority of your time, and you can do something smarter with that time when it's such a huge block of time, then you're really digging into the things that are causing you the most stress, like the biggest pain points of being a teacher. And one of those, teachers consistently tell me all across the country in school districts, large and small, that feedback is one of the things that is taking the most time on their part. And it's also one of the things they feel the least confident about, and that they are the least sure is making a difference to students learning. And so that's all a big ironic puzzle right there to me. Why do we spend so much time doing something we're not even sure makes a difference? So we have to dig into this and think about, how do we do it better? How do we do it faster? And how do we make sure that when we're spending time on this, it's actually making an impact with kids? And that's what I love to talk to teachers about and get them thinking about in a different way and give them some concrete strategies that they can use to fix kind of those problems that I see with feedback.
Okay, so you kind of gave us an outline right there about how we can move forward this morning. So let's talk about what it is and what it's not, like examples, non-examples, and then maybe some tools that people can use.
Okay, great. I love that idea. Well, one thing that it's not, and I read the article that you sent and I really enjoyed that. I had not seen that article before, but a lot of times what happens when we think we're giving feedback is that we're not actually giving somebody information that they can use to improve their work. And the number one problem with it is that we do it at the wrong time in the process. So even though this is not confined to English teachers, let's think about that as an example. Just because English teachers spend more time doing this than any other teachers, it makes it a good example to consider. So if I'm an English teacher and I am giving feedback after the assignment is finished and we are not going to return to it, that's the wrong time to give feedback. Mm-hmm. That's truly grade justification. And that is not what we're talking about, right?
Grade justification.
And I did that. Yeah, it's grade justification. Why am I writing all of this text on this paper? I have never, ever talked to a teacher who says, oh, yes, all of my students pore over that information that I have written on their graded paper. No, they flip through it until they see the number and they don't look at it anymore. They'll leave it in your classroom, stuff it in their backpack, put it in the trash. And if you spent 10 or 15 minutes grading or providing feedback on that paper that is never going to be used by that student, you really wasted time if your objective is to educate. So that usually makes people think about their practice when we have that real conversation of what actually is happening to that text you're writing on that paper. So first of all, it's when you're doing it. Once the assignment is completed is not the time to give the feedback. The feedback should be happening during the work process, and it should be a part of the process. Once I'm putting a grade on that, let's say the paper's an 86. Let me give you a rubric and let me circle some numbers on there and let me put down the 86. If you want to conference with me about that, or if your parents want to conference with me about that, if there are questions, that's a different conversation than me spending 10 or 15 minutes essentially writing a justification of that grade. When the feedback should be happening is before the summative happens. So maybe it is after the second draft in the English world that feedback is happening. But it is definitely not when I'm giving you the 86 and that assignment is over.
Right. And so in your opinion, if we're going to, because I taught 7th grade language arts too. So let's say we assign a paper, mm-hmm. right? And so there's usually a first draft due. Or let's say there's probably even before that, right? There's some outlining or something like that too.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There would be feedback after that point. I mean, do you start that early or do you wait until at the first draft?
I think in the English world, it really depends on your writer and where your writer is in their ability to convey information. I mean, at that point, you may be even at the stage of saying, this entirely does not make sense to me. So that kind of feedback may be face-to-face or verbal. It could be peer-to-peer. I think I would like to, with most developing writers, I would like to see that work after peers have seen it, after they have had other people read it, maybe after they have recorded themselves reading it aloud to themselves, and maybe no one else heard that. But I'd like for them to do as much reflection on that as they can and get as much authentic feedback from whoever they perceive their audience to be before I come into that situation. And a lot of that is just triage, because teachers I talk to now, I literally have talked to teachers who teach almost 200 students writing, which is, my sympathies are just with them. That is, the workload of that is gigantic. So they can't do that early in the process. They've got to find other ways for students to get feedback from an audience that is not them. So once they have refined that message and they have written something that a peer can understand, and now they have some sort of a piece for me to see, to react to, something for me to react to. That's the point where I want to see that work. So I guess it just depends on your writer. It could be earlier for some than others, but you want to take feedback opportunities that are not you as much as you can.
So let's say your kids they've drafted, they've done some peer editing, some self-reflection, reading it to their intended audience, and then you get the paper. Right. What does your feedback actually look like? Is it circling spelling errors? Is it content, everything? What does it look like?
That's a really good question. And I think this is another area where I personally, as an instructor, had to think critically about why I was doing what I was doing, because in reality, looking back on the years that I spent marking things like that on paper. So, I think about it with a red pen, even though, even at the time you and I were marking those papers and we were doing it about the same time, we probably already had been told don't use a red pen, but it doesn't really matter because so it's green, but whatever, it takes the same amount of time.
I use gel pens. Gel pens were big back when
they were, weren't they? Yes, I love them. And it turns out it didn't matter if the ink faded and the kid couldn't see it because they never really looked at it anyway. Right. I mean, it didn't actually in my own personal experience, and also what other teachers tell me, those marks on that paper did not seem to have any impact on a student improving. They might change that word that time, but what they didn't do is take that knowledge and transfer it and say, oh, okay, I see. If there are two independent clauses joined together by a conjunction, there has to be a comma in the middle. And I might mark that, 100 times. It never led to a change. So I thought to myself, why am I doing this? This is an extremely time-consuming process. This is not teaching. So I had to stop doing it. I had to stop thinking about marking papers or providing feedback in that way because I realized it made no difference. A student may be able to see that in someone else's writing. They could not see it in their own writing. So I stopped doing that. And I know that's probably like a lot of teachers who have been doing that for 20 years are probably like maybe mind blown right now if they're listening to this. But I'm a good English teacher and I'm thoughtful about my practice. And I don't think that makes any difference. If I had seen it make a difference, I would have continued doing it because I would have said, this is worth my time. It wasn't. So I'm going to use peer editors for things like that. I'm not going to probably even spend any time ever giving feedback on things like that. I'm probably going to mostly focus my efforts on ideas and comprehension and understanding, because in reality, even in my writing, I have a master's degree in English. I'm going to get an editor to look at my writing. I'm not just going to rely on myself. And that's the real world, truly, is having an editor. So when I am talking about feedback now, what I mean is, I'm going to open up some sort of a recorder. I love Screencastify personally. I think it's the easiest, fastest way to get feedback in a form that students will listen to. So I'm going to open up Screencastify. I'm going to put that student's paper on the screen, whether it's under a document camera and it's literally a written document, or whether it's a Google Doc or some other form of electronic communication. I'm going to get it on my screen and I'm going to put my headset on like you and I are wearing right now, and I'm going to talk to my student about that writing. I'm going to say, here's this sentence. I don't understand what you mean. Let me read it back to you. Or I'm going to say, I'm reading your story, and I think really this thing happened before this other thing. Is that right? I'm confused. Or I'm going to talk to them about what they have written on the page and about what impact it's having on me as a reader. And I'm going to be asking them questions. So it's not going to be the kind of feedback that I was giving before I really got thoughtful and intentional about feedback. It's massively different now from what I originally would have said was providing feedback.
Well, and I think something you bring up, all those examples that you gave were how you were interacting with the piece.
Yes.
right? As opposed to giving advice.
Yes. Yes. And I love that about the article that you shared. So,
which I'll link in the show notes for everyone else if they're
yes,
interested.
okay, that's good. I'd love everyone to see that article because I had never really thought about it in that exact way before, and I had never thought about the difference between advice and feedback. But yes, I think that early in my career when I was a beginning writing teacher, and honestly, how many of us go into the classroom with very good instruction on how to teach other people to write, and it's an extremely hard thing to teach. And I think many teachers are really struggle for years to feel like they're masters of that. But I was giving advice, and I never saw that advice taken. And it was because my students didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't the kind of feedback that they needed. I loved the story in the article about the student who came up to the teacher at the end of the year and said, you know, you've been writing this word on my paper all year and I've never known what it meant. And I'm wondering now, can you explain to me what is vagu? And the teacher says, Vagu? What are you talking about? And the student brings up the paper and shows her where she has written VAGUE all year long on the paper. And it's like the most ironic but true example I've ever seen. Yes, if I write vague on your paper 100 times, even if it takes me 25 seconds every time, I've really invested time in that. If you don't know what the word vague means, I mean, we just have had a major failure to communicate when that's exactly what we were trying to do the whole time. Right. So when I started using video to give students feedback, and I started using myself as a mirror for their writing, here I am, your reader, trying to get meaning from what you have put on the page. That's such an authentic relationship, and it's exactly what we want students to be thinking about. But I was able to be that voice that you don't usually get as a writer to hear. What is my reader thinking when he or she reads this piece? I saw amazing things happen. So I had this one particular class, the first class I ever tried this with, and they happened to be a college class, but I don't want you to think about a regular college class of students. So this was a night class at a junior college, and a lot of the students in this class had not been in school in years. This is not, like A+ seniors who had just graduated from high school. This was a varied group with people who were really struggling with writing, many of them. Yeah. So I had been doing the typical thing of writing on the papers, and they had been doing their typical thing of shoving it in their bag and never looking at it again. And I had this epiphany after years and years of teaching writing, like, I've got to do something different here. I just don't have time to do this, really was my motivation. So at that time, TechSmith had produced this tool called Jing, which was a free screencasting tool. And
I use it all the time.
Yeah, it's really wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I use Screencastify now, but same purpose, and really whatever tool works best for a person is what they should use. So I started, I just on a whim really thought, I wonder if I can do this faster if I do it with video. That was really my goal. Mm-hmm. So I tried it, and after I got my practice down, after the clicks were natural, I found it was taking me from 1/3 to 1/5 of the time to give feedback on a piece of writing. And I thought, well, I'm trying to solve several problems here. One problem is my own time problem, but another problem is what happens to this feedback is not useful. It's not being taken into consideration. It's not being effective. So I need to solve that problem too. But I thought if I can solve one of these two problems, at least I'm doing better than I was. So Absolutely. I solved my time problem, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
I knew I had solved that problem. So I thought, let me persist in this and see if it has any impact on the other side. So I took these links, URLs back to my students and said, all right, here's the feedback on your writing for this week. And, I didn't really hear much from them, and I didn't know if it had solved my other problem. I just knew it saved me time. So the next time that my students turned in writing for feedback, they asked me, Miss Mayer, are you going to do that thing with the video again? And I said, well, yeah, I think I am, but why do you ask? And my kids were like, well, because that's so much better, because I understood what you were talking about, because I really feel like my paper was better after I listened to that, because for the first time I ever felt like I understood what an English teacher was telling me about my writing. And I think it really made a difference to me. Or, I really enjoyed listening to you talk about what happened in your brain while you read my work, or I appreciated the compliment that you gave me about it, or whatever. But all of these positive things came out when I asked them, what do you think about it? Did it make a change for you? And the response was really overwhelming. And I thought, I really, it was one of those cartoon moments where you feel like there's a light bulb over your head that's gone off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it was the light bulb moment. And I thought, where's every English teacher I know so I can tell them this? And then, of course, as years went by, I realized this is not just for English teachers. Math teachers can do this. Social studies teachers can do this. Any teacher who is giving any level of complex feedback really should be considering using video. It's faster and it's much better. And students will listen to it, especially if you intersperse some positive feedback about their work. And that is not good job. It is not, I like this. It is, I like the way you said this. Let me read it back to you. It gave me chills. That's like, you have reinforced my behavior if you've said that to me. I really want to do that again. I'm making a connection with you as a reader, and I'm seeing myself as a writer in a way that I may not have before. So it was just such a powerful practice. Like I told you when we met in Illinois, I felt like it was one of the most transformative moments I've ever experienced as a teacher. And so I really try to teach this wherever I go and am a trainer. I try to share this strategy.
So your number one strategy is the video feedback.
Yes, the video was the thing. And if I can, number one, convince teachers that it's going to be faster, which it absolutely 100% is faster. And then I can also show them from sort of a perspective of the student, how much better it is. If I had all year long said, this sentence here is vague, that means I don't understand what it means. It's not specific enough. I can say that so fast. I can say that faster than I can write Vagu on a paper.
Right.
and you understand what I'm saying. And I'm giving you an insight into my brain and what's happening in my mind when I read your writing. I mean, it's just, like, I don't know why every teacher everywhere is not using video to do feedback. And I'm not talking about, you were supposed to mark B and you marked C. That doesn't need this kind of feedback. But I'm talking about when you're trying to model thinking to someone and you're trying to express these subtleties of mind. I mean, what better form could there possibly be than video?
Right. Yeah. And I also noticed on your website that you are anti-worksheet.
I am anti-worksheet. Yes.
Yes. Well, so am I. Colleague of mine, and actually I've never met her in person, but we have No Worksheet Week.
Oh.
Yeah. You should look it up. NoWorksheetWeek.com.
Yeah, I will. I am going to look that up.
It happened in April and it does every year. We actually made it all month long this year. And so things like this, the Screencastify is exactly what we're talking about. And so but when you're talking about feedback, something on a worksheet where it's multiple choice or, even simple arithmetic problems. But I could see if you're a math teacher and you have the students' work in front of you and you can actually point out where they went wrong.
Yes.
In their computation. And that would be a 10-second, 20-second video.
Right.
That would probably mean more than trying to read your handwriting in among all their writing,
Yes.
So.
Well, and I was that math student who needed that. And I needed to know why. I needed to see an example. Hold on just a second.
And so we can also, though, I'd like you and me to kind of brainstorm how this would look in other classes so that other teachers besides English teachers could walk away from this episode with something. So I also taught science. All right.
Oh, yeah. Science is great for this.
So how would you see this in a science classroom?
Well, one way that I see this used in a science classroom is really not exactly the way we've been talking about, but I've always thought that what if students, instead of doing those lab reports, what if they were talking to you as a teacher, and maybe they were recording their hypothesis, and then they were recording their experiment, and then they were recording themselves talking about, why they think whatever the result was happened. I mean, that's what you're trying to evaluate when you're looking at that writing. Am I right about that?
That's true. So would you take them through, okay, I'm thinking like how this would actually look in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So you're working, or you're having them, and once again, I'm coming from the 7th grade point where we're just teaching the scientific method, right? So that one of the common activities is for them to use the scientific method, come up with their own question, hypothesis, and then a protocol that would help them answer that question.
Yes.
Right? So would you have them record video and hand it in through Google Classroom or whatever, one step at a time, or would you have them put it all together at the end?
I'm always about what is going to be the easiest for me as a teacher if it's not going to have a negative impact on the student as a learner. So what I would do is I would teach my kids to use whatever screencasting tool we had at our disposal. And that could be different depending on what device you have in your classroom. But if it's Chromebooks, then I would do Screencastify through, the Chrome browser, install it. And then I would have them hypothesize, pause the video, do the next step. I would have them talk about the next step that they just did, pause the video, carry on. So when they finished, they might have a video that was a few minutes long that had their whole process in that video. But again, here's another aspect of this, not to rabbit trail too much, but we're always asking students to be evaluated essentially on their writing. So we end up evaluating a process that happens in between their brain and their fingertips. And that's not really fair. That's not really what we meant to do. We're trying to evaluate thinking, but we're pretending that writing equals thinking, and writing does not equal thinking. And not just for students with dysgraphia or dyslexia. Writing doesn't equal thinking for anyone. It's not the same thing. But most people are better at expressing their thinking verbally than they are through writing. Most adults, most human beings, period. So why are we always using the written word to evaluate what's happening in someone's mind when we don't have to do that anymore?
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So if we don't have to do that, let's use a different method. Let's differentiate, which is, a word we started using, 20 years ago in education, but let's differentiate the product and say, why don't you talk to me about what you've learned from this experiment? Why don't you talk to me about why you think your hypothesis was wrong and how you have now proven it wrong? How do you know that it was wrong? So maybe I, as a teacher, am providing you a question stem, and then I'm giving everybody a minute to record. And yes, if you have Google Classroom, that's a super easy way to collect these recordings. But there are lots of ways you could do this. You could set up a Google form and you could have students paste the link to their video into the form. And I know that kids as young as even second semester, second grade students can do this.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So in a social studies class where you're looking at reading something, or you're even reacting to a video, I could see kids, pausing the video and on Charlemagne or whatever, and talking about how they would, the little kids would be like, would you have him as your friend? Why or why not?
Exactly.
And talk about that.
And then big kids, you're thinking about, what if this one event had not happened leading up to World War II? How might things have been different? I mean, I ask, as social studies teachers ask students to write about things like that all the time. But then again, we're back to evaluating writing. And that's not always the intention, to evaluate the writing. I want to know that you understand. And in real life, if I want to know if somebody understands something, I don't say, hey, can you write me an essay on this and send it to me, right? I look in their face, I look in their eyes, and I say, does this make sense to you? Can you repeat that back to me? Can you talk to me about your reaction to that? Can you show me how this one thing relates to this other thing? And when they can do that, then I have confidence they understand, not when they've written an essay. So let's do that. Let's take that strategy, knowing what we know about screencasting. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, but I don't know how to screencast, pull up our YouTube channel. It's YouTube/Fried Technology, and you'll find a bunch of different videos there about using Screencastify. It's just one tool of many, but at least you'll have a place to start, because this is going to save you time and it's going to be better for your students. And now you've solved two of the biggest problems that teachers have. A third problem that it can also help you solve is building relationships with students, which is the most important thing you can do to support classroom management. So really, it can also help you solve the third biggest problem of teaching today.
So it saves time. It provides a learning, teachable moment, right? So
Yes.
the kids actually learn something from you.
Yes.
And it helps build relationships because it gives them kind of a little one-on-one private moment with you.
Exactly.
This is how me as a teacher is how I interact with you in your writing.
Yes. When students see you as a human being like they are, that can be the big change moment for classroom management. Classroom management is the number one thing that teachers talk to me about when I ask them about their struggles in their work. And building relationships solves most of the classroom management problems that most teachers have. The world has changed. The way people interact with each other has changed, and we have to change along with that. And this strategy can actually be a great part of a holistic way of connecting individually with students. I'm not talking to you as a whole group. Hey, let's stop writing run-on sentences. I'm showing you individually. This is how this interrupts meaning for me as your reader when you write a run-on sentence or whatever the subject is. Apply that to any subject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And probably if you even spend an extra 45 seconds in your video giving a little mini lesson,
yes,
that would be like a 45-minute lesson in your class as far as effectiveness goes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason why is because it's not a shotgun effect. I mean, I'm not just throwing this out here on top of everybody, hoping that it lands on the right person at the right moment with the right context, which is so incredibly unlikely. I'm talking to you about your writing, and this is for you. And even the idea that no one else is even going to hear this is powerful, because I get such a warm, fuzzy feeling as a learner if someone is actually looking at my work. And this is one of the reasons why we have our, you guys have your No Worksheet week, and I have my title Worksheet Killer. We even have pins we give to teachers, Worksheet Killer. And the reason why is because you're never going to get that kind of personal connection to learning through a worksheet. And it's a sad, old-fashioned way of getting facts on a piece of paper, but we now Google those. That's not the kind of learning we're trying to hit anymore. And so this whole video thing it just addresses, this is why when you and I talked about doing a podcast together, I said, it's got to be about this subject, because it's the game changer in education right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that we did have this conversation.
Me too. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks so much for making time in your busy fried technology world to speak with me about using Screencastify to provide feedback and making it meaningful for students, first of all, because that's what we're all here for, but also to save teachers time. My goodness, that's
Right.
what I hear all the time.
I know, don't you? Me too. And so I just want to tell every teacher in the world, try video. That's it.
Thank you for listening, and thanks to Amy for her wisdom on using video for feedback. Links to her website, information about Screencastify, and other resources we talked about in this episode can be found at the podcast's home, www.teachillinois.com/podcast. Our music today is from danosongs.com. This podcast and the courses on Teach Illinois are supported by the Area 5 Regional Offices of Education here in Illinois. The Teacher's Classroom is published twice monthly, so be sure to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave a positive review so that our voice can reach even more listeners. Until next time, the light in me honors and sees the light in each of you.